Hello, so welcome back to the second part of the Angular Customizable Dashboard series where we'll be building up a customizable Angular Material dashboard where you can basically resize your widgets, you can basically change the heights of widgets, you can change the order of the widgets, and you can also delete and you can also add new widgets if you'd like to, all while the grid is being nicely animated. All right, so let's get started with the second part. Now, in the previous part, we stopped at this point where we added a basic layout and the dashboard widgets, two dashboard widgets with some content components which are dynamically rendered here. So let's continue. And the first thing now we want to do here is to add the add widget button on the right side here, which you can see in the final this. This is going to allow us to add widgets dynamically to the UI. All right. So let's start with that. So we're going to go back in our code and you can see that we have the dashboard component here. Now in this dashboard component, we are going to add the add button somewhere here. So let's create a div here and let's put the channel dashboard inside of it. And then besides that, we are going to create a button here. We're going to import the mat button module because we want to use the mat button. We're going to use the mat raised button here and we're going to name this as add widget. We also want to have an icon here, which is a nice touch when we create buttons of this sort so that it can give an indication of what this button is going to do. We want to also import the mat icon and then is in mat in this icon we're going to do add underscore circle. Great. Let's also style this up a bit. So we're going to add a class here and we're going to call it header, and in the header class we are going to make it display flex, and we're also going to make justify content space between so that we can put the button on the right side, on the extreme right, and then we're going to also align items center so that they are aligned vertically. So let's save this and let's see how this looks visually, and you can see that it looks really nice. Okay, so now we want to have a menu here which is going to show all of the widgets that are available to be added. Now what we want here is that we don't want to show all of the widgets here in the list. We only want to show the widgets which have not been added on the UI, because there's no point in actually duplicating widgets. So how do we handle that? Now, what we need to do is we need to first go to our dashboard service, and you can see that we currently we have just a single widgets signal here, which represents all of our widgets. Now let's create another signal here, and we're going to call this added widgets. All right. Now these are going to be the widgets which have basically been added to the UI. So initially we're going to say that, okay, we don't have any widgets added to the UI. All right. Then we're going to create a computed. And this is the power of the signals reactivity API, that we can create derived computed values based on these two signals. So we are going to create widgets to add. This is going to be a computed. And now we can compute here what we want to actually do. So what you're going to do here is that we are going to first get all of the IDs for the widgets that have been added. So we're going to do this dot map w and w.id. Okay. Then we're going to return only the widgets which are not of this ID. So what we're going to do, we're just going to add a filter here, and we're going to do header ID includes added IDs dot includes and w.id, and we're going to make this false. So it does not include these IDs. So this means it's only going to give back the widgets which have not been yet added on the UI. All right. So let's save this. And now we can go back to our dashboard component here and we can create a new material menu here. So let's first import the mat menu module. Okay, so we need to also import it from here, Angular material menu. Let's import this here and let's add a menu here like this. We're going to do mat menu, and this mat menu is going to take our widgets to add signal, and we're going to show all of those widgets here. So let's convert it to a button. In fact, we're going to style it using the mat menu item directive, which is going to style it according to a menu item. And then within that, or in fact, we first also need to give the control block here, the for control block. We're going to say of, and wait, what do we want to get here? So we want to get here the store dot widgets to add signal. All right. And then we're going to track it using the widget.id. That's not a problem because the ID is unique in any case. And then within this, we're going to give a button of this. And within this button, we're going to give the label of that widget, all right, which you want to add. Great. So this menu is fine. We also need to export this menu. So we're going to call this as widget menu, and we're going to export this as a mat menu. And let's then also link it here, mat menu trigger for, with this widget menu. Great. So now it's going to open up when we click on add widget here. All right. So let's save this and test this out. And now you can see that we have our add widget here. We're going to click on this and you can see we have our nice menu here. Okay, now when we click on this, nothing happens. So we need to add handling for adding the widget on the UI. And also another thing, we can still see our widgets here because we're getting it from the wrong signal here. So we're going to switch that signal to, instead of widgets, we're going to switch it to added widgets. All right. And now you can see that our UI is empty because no widgets are present in that initially. All right. So now when we click on this, we need to add the widget to the UI. So that means that we need to add that specific widget to the added widget signal. So let's create a function in our dashboard service or in our store, and let's call this add widget. So here we're just gonna take the widget itself, the widget type, and what we're gonna do is that in the added widgets signal, we are going to set the new value that we want with the new widget added to the structure. Okay, so here we can also change the existing structure or the existing added widgets signal value directly. But what we want is, because we're using those signals in our template, we want to change it immutably. And this is really something that you need to be careful of while working with signals. If you want the updates to objects to be reflected on the UI, you would want to change them immutably. That means you would want to create new references for any changes to your existing objects. So here, for example, we have the array here, added widgets, but we would like to create another array here containing the same values. So we're going to create the array here containing the same values using the spread operator, but we're also going to add the widget here. And even for the widget, we want to create a different object for that widget. Okay, not the same widget that we are getting from this. Okay, so add widget should work now because we are updating the added widgets. And let's now link it with our menu item button here. So on clicking it, we can just do store dot and we can give our widget inside of this. Okay. Okay. Another thing that I have done here is I have created a copy of the widget here. And I've done this on purpose because I don't want to, when I update the widget to, change the layout and the rows and the columns, I don't want to update this original predefined structure that we have. I just want to update the copy that we have here so that we can easily save it and get it. And our original widgets list is basically safe and we can reuse it again when we need it later. All right. So add widget works and we are copying add widget here. So let's just test this out and see whether we can add the widget. So now when we click on subscribers, you can see that we add this subscribers here. And when we click on views, you can see that we can add views here. And now you can see that we don't have anything displayed here when there's nothing here. So let's also use another feature of the for control block and let's add an empty control block here. Now in the empty control block, we're just going to have an empty button here, which does nothing. So we're going to remove the click event here and we're just going to write here that no widgets to add. Okay, let's test this out. And now when you click on subscribers and views, now you can see that it says no widgets to add. So nothing happens here. All right. It's just a visual indication to make the user aware of what's happening. All right. So our add widget button works perfectly. Okay, so next we want to add the options panel here. So for example, we want to add the options button here and the options panel, which is going to allow us to customize the widget. But first, in order for us not to repeatedly have to add these widgets when our app gets refreshed, let us just add these two widgets to our structure here so that we don't have to add these two widgets here and we can test it out easily. All right. So, okay, now we get these widgets when we refresh this just for the time being here. So now we need to add our options button. So let's first change this header here. Let's go in our widget. Okay, so we have our heading here. Now what we want to do is we want the settings button to actually be positioned absolutely on the top right. So we're going to add the button here like this. We're also going to import our mat button module and also the mat icon because we want to use the mat icon button. We're going to make this mat icon button here and within this mat icon will be the settings icon. This will have an absolute position. So we're going to do it like this. We're going to do settings button here. And then within this here, we're going to do settings button. And the position is going to be absolute. And then we want to keep it a top of 20 and a right of 20 as well to position it right in the line of our heading so that it appears nice. So let's just see how this looks. And now you can see that it appears nicely aligned with this and with the right amount of padding on the right and left side. Okay. All right. So what is this button going to do? Now this button is going to toggle between the options panel being open and closed. All right. So let's create a signal here, which we are going to use to toggle the state of the options panel. And let's call this show options. This is going to be a signal which will be false initially. Okay. And this button is going to simply, in the click event handler, we want to do show options dot set true. All right. Okay. So now what will our options panel be like? Now our options panel is basically just a div on top of our existing widget container here. So what we're going to do here is that we are going to, below this, we're going to use an if block with a new control flow, and we're going to do show options. So if show options is true, we want to show the options panel. Now, since we have a lot of logic and HTML markup and template in our widget options component, we would like it to create a new component for that purpose. So let's create a new component now. And where we're going to keep this, we're going to keep this inside of this widget as well, because it's a subset of the widget or the nested component. So we're going to do nggc, and we're going to go in components widget, and we're going to say widget options. All right. So we have created the widget options component, and let's import that widget options component now here. We're going to do app widget options. Let's use the quick tip here, and you can see that it adds this widget options component here. All right. So let's see what the widget options component looks like at this point. So as we click on the settings icon here, you can see that the widget option works appears. That means it's part of the flow itself. Now we don't want it like that. We want it to be on top of everything. So we're going to add some styling for that purpose. All right. So let's add some styling for the widget option component. Okay. So we are going to add some host styling here, and I'm just going to copy some of the style here so that we can save some of our time. So this is going to be this, something like this. Okay. So we are going to make it the position as absolute, and it's going to have a z index of 2 so that it comes on top of everything. We're going to give it a background of a light gray white smoke. The text will be black, and we position it on the top left. The border radius, we're going to keep it the same, and the width and the height is going to cover the whole of the widget itself so that we can't see the background behind it. And then within that, we also want the arrangement of this to be a column wise arrangement. And then within that, we also want all of the widgets, all of the divs that we have to be arranged in a certain way, in a flex way. So we're going to add this styling as well here. All right. It's display flex, a bit of a gap, and some margin at the bottom. All right. Great. So now the first thing that we need to add here is to basically just add a button. And this button is basically our close button. Okay, so let's add an import here for the button module, then for the matte icon as well. And this is going to be a matte icon button, and the matte icon is going to be the close icon, because we want to change the state of the show options boolean signal through this. And let's give it a class of close button, and this close button is also going to be similarly sort of arranged as we did with the settings button, but it's going to be a bit closer to the top, right? So we're going to have a top 0, and we're going to have the right 0. All right, let's save this and see how this looks. So we're going to go and we're going to click on this, and now you can see we have a sort of a white smoky background and with a close button. Now the close button does not do anything. So let's add that functionality, and to do that, we actually need to change the show options signal, but that signal is in the parent of this component. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the model inputs feature, which has been added recently. So let's do that. And in the widget here, or in fact in the widget options first, we are going to add a show options model input here. We add the model input like this, and we're going to give it the type of boolean, and initially it's going to be false. Okay, and then what we can do is that we can just, on the click of this button, we can change this show options dot set to false. And now, since it's a model input, when we send this input from the parent, which is a widget, it's going to change it from within. All right. So here we have the show option signal, and we can just simply use the banana in the box syntax to specify the show options in this way. Okay. So this means that this is a two-way binding, which means that we can actually change the value from within the widget options as well. All right. So let's try this out and let's see whether this works. So when you click on this now, you can see that it toggles between these states very nicely. All right. Okay. So we are toggling between the states. Now let's build upon the widget options more. Okay. Now we need to add the customizable resize feature first. So how do we resize our widgets? And considering that it is a CSS grid, now it would be good here to give a refresher of the CSS grid basically. So if you look at our current implementation, we have a display grid and we have a grid template columns property here, where we are specifically telling the CSS grid how many columns we'll have. Okay. So for the columns, we actually know it in advance. We want it to be laid out in a certain way. But what happens to the rows? So for the rows, we don't actually know how many rows initially we'll have. So we can't give the grid template rows property as well. So instead, to specify the size of the row that we want, we are going to specify a property which is called the grid auto rows property. So let's add this here, grid auto rows. And here we're going to give a size slightly smaller than 200 pixels because we want the minimum size of our widgets to be basically a rectangular shape. Now, if you wanted to keep a square shape, you're most welcome to do that. Now, this 200 pixels of the column and the 150 pixels of the row, this is going to represent one cell of our grid basically. So let's save this. And I also created a diagram for you so that you can understand this better. So we have, for example, here the CSS grid that we want to make. Each of our column is basically a minimum width of 200 pixels. And for the row, we have auto row of 150 pixels. That means any row that we create because of the widgets overflowing is going to be of this size. All right. Now, how do we specify the sizes of the grid items? Now, we specify the size of the grid items by using a property called grid column and grid row. All right. So if, for example, in our case, if, for example, the width is 1, that means that is going to span just one column size here, which is 200 pixels. And if we specify the grid row as 1, that means it's going to span 150 pixels in the vertical side. So if you want to give resize options, we actually would want to change the grid column and the grid row property dynamically. All right. So if, for example, we have in this case, if you want the widget to span the whole size here, we would give it a width of 3, and that would mean in the CSS grid specification that the grid column is going to be span 3 here. And similarly, if you want to span the whole height here of 2 rows, we are going to specify the span 2 as the grid row property. So that is essentially what we want to do. Now, how do we do it? Let's see. Okay, so the first thing we need to do here is to add our controls. And we are going to use the matte material button toggle group component because that seems to be the most ideal way to allow the user to give in these predefined values that we want for our width and height. Okay, so let's go in our options, widget options component here. So what we're going to do here is that first of all, we want to import our matte button toggle group. In fact, we would like to import it here. So we're going to do import angular material button toggle here, button toggle module. And then we're going to add the first control here. So we're going to enclose this in a div. And because we have added some styling for the div as well, so it's going to be laid out perfectly. Firstly, we're going to give the width, and then in front of the width, we will have our matte button toggle group. And then within that, we are going to have our button toggle values. So I have these button toggle values here, something like this. So each of the button toggle component within the button toggle group has a value which is displayed and then a value which is set. So in our case, it is the same. So we have put the same here, and let's see how this looks. So if we save this and if we go back to our app here, you can see when we go in settings, you can see we have our here like this. But you can see we have this check mark. Since we don't have much space on the widgets, we don't want to include this check mark here. So there's an option in matte button toggle group here, which is called hide single selection indicator. And we're going to make this true. That's going to remove that option. All right. So we don't have that option now. Now we can also see that our button is a bit too big. So the number is smaller, but the button is big. Now we want to customize this a bit so that we can make it a bit smaller. So how do we do that? Now in Angular Material version 3, we have the option of using design tokens. So let's go and see which design token we want to change. And you can see here that we have matte standard button toggle height here. So we can change this, and let's change this here. Let's copy this here and let's add it to the host here. And let's make this maybe just 16 pixels. And you can see our buttons look a bit better for this specific widget size here. All right. So the width one looks nice. Let's also add the height one. Let's copy this here. Let's add the height here. So as it turns out, the height one also requires the same value. So we are not going to be changing any of them here. And you can see we have our width and heights here. All right. So, but where are we going to get the values from? As it turns out, we haven't yet added the values in the widget component itself or the widget type. So we need to do that. So let's go in our dashboard model. And here we're going to add a rows property, which is going to be optional. So our rows property is going to be a number, and then we'll have a columns property. This is also going to be a number. Okay. And now let's go to our widget again. And in our widget here, we would like these rows and column values to be bound to our grid column and grid row property for each of our widgets here. So how do we do that? We are going to use the host binding here. And basically the host is a set of values or key value pairs, which is going to set some values. You can set styles to it as well. You can bind event handlers to it as well. Basically, it is a sort of a common way to do the things that you would do with the host binding decorator, the host listener decorator that you would use when you want to bind an event on the host, or you want to bind a style on the host with some value in your component. So the Angular team recommends that you use this way because you can also bind towards to signals in this way as well. Okay. So how do we bind this host here? So instead of using the grid column and the grid row property, we can also use the grid area property, which is sort of a combination of both of them. So let's use that here, and we're going to do styled grid area. And here we're going to do span space, and we're going to use the signal dot rows value here. And if, for example, rows is not given, we're going to assume that is just one cell width or one cell height. So we're going to give it 1. All right. And then we give dash here and the span again. And then we're going to give the data columns property. And if the columns are not there, then we're going to give the same thing as 1. Okay. Let's save this. And so how do we test this? Now to test this, let's go in our dashboard service, and we want to add some rows and columns here. So let's say, for example, we add rows here as 2 and columns here as well. It should show up in the changed layout here. So you can see that now it's spanning 2 columns and it's spanning 2 rows here. Okay. But it's not being changed with this width and height. So how do we change that? So we need to add event handlers to update the widget according to these values. All right. So let's do that next. Let's go to our options, widget options first. Okay, so for the value here, we are going to use the data.columns property. And if the columns property is not there, then we're going to assume that it is 1. All right. Similarly, for the height, which means that we want to use the rows property. So we're going to use the rows property here and assume that it's 1 if it's not that. Okay. So let's save this. And now when we check this, we're going to see that the 2 value is selected here and the 1 value is selected here because this is the current value that we want. Okay, now we want to change the widget rows and columns according to our button toggle. So how do we do that? Okay, we're going to go in our dashboard service now. And in our dashboard service, we are going to create a function called update widget. All right, now this is going to get our ID first, widget ID, and then it's going to get the widget data, which is going to be a partial of the widget object. It can give in any number of properties that we want to update in the widget, and it's going to update it in that specific added widget so that we can change it on the UI. All right. First of all, we're going to get the index of the widget that we want. So we're going to do this dot added widgets and w.id is equals to id. Okay, and we're going to check if its index is not equals to -1. That means that it is present in the added widgets, added widgets structure. Then we are going to create a new widgets object. As I told you before, we need to make changes immutably. So we're going to create a new widgets with our added widgets spread out like this. And then for the new widgets, we are going to, in that specific index, we are going to change, or in fact, we're going to create a new one with the new widgets index and with the widget data that we have here. Okay, so all of the previous values it will get, and then it's going to override the new values that we get from the properties that we want to update this. Now this can include rows, this can include columns, this can include other properties as well in the future if you'd like to. So this is sort of a generic update widget function which you can use later on as well. All right, so now that we have changed the new widgets, we can just simply update it to the added widgets. All right, so let's use this update widget now in our widget options component. And how do we do that? Basically, we're just going to use the change property here. Okay, so for this we need the store. Now we don't have the store injected here, so we can just inject it here. Store is equals to inject dashboard service. And just as an aside, why can we inject the store here? Since it's not that same component that we provided in there, because it's a child of the dashboard component. Now, if you go to the dashboard component again here, you can see that we provided the dashboard service here. This means that the dashboard service is going to be available. This instance is going to be available on all of the children of dashboard component. And it so happens that all of the widgets and the options component as well is also a child of this dashboard component. So we can access the same store inside of this as well just by using the inject function already. Okay. So we just want to change this store and we want to use the update function there. So we're going to do store.update widget. And in this widget, we are going to give this value. What do we want to update? We want to update the columns here. And these columns are going to be event.value, the updated value. And we also want to cast it into a number because it is basically by default a string. All right. And of course, TypeScript is best. So we get an error that we need to send the widget ID as well. So we're going to add the widget ID here as well. Data.id. Great. So this should work. And we're just going to copy the same thing for the height as well. And instead of the rows, we're just going to do, instead of the columns, we're just going to do the rows here. Okay. Let's test this out. So now when we reduce the width, we can see that the width reduces. And when we reduce the height, you can see that the height reduces. And in fact, we can make it 3 height as well, 4 height as well. And now we have the width and the height as resizable or customizable. Okay, we can close this and we can see how it looks like in that case. Great. Okay, so we added the resizable widgets feature. Now we want to add the positioning feature so that we can change the position of this widget forward and backwards and move it around in the CSS grid. So how do we do that? So first, let's add 2 buttons here which are going to move this widget. And to do that, let's go back to the widget options. And in the widget options component here, we are going to add 2 more buttons similar to the close button. And these are going to be absolutely positioned as well, just like the close button. So we're going to keep them simple. Let's make the class here as move forward for the right button. And this will be move backward. Let's remove the click event handler for now because we don't need this. And for the move forward button, we want to use chevron underscore right icon. And for the backward button, we want to use chevron underscore left icon. Okay. And let's then add the absolutely positioning for this. And so we're just going to copy this class here as well. Let's call this move forward again. And this is going to be move backward. And here for the move forward button, we are going to do a top of 50%. So we want it to be right in the middle of the widget. Now, the top 50% is not going to make it in exactly in the middle because of the height of the button as well. So we have to do a sort of a trick here using the transform where we translate the y-axis about 50%. Since we specify 50%, this is 50% of the height of the button. So we are going to then go into exactly the middle of the widget here in this way. And then since there's a move forward button on the right side, we want to position it about -5 pixels from the right side. Okay, great. So similarly, we're going to copy this here as well. The top and the transform is fine, but on the right, we're going to make this the left because this is the backwards button. Okay, let's see how this looks. You can see that our buttons look great. So we want to add the functionality for them now. Let's go to our dashboard service. And let's add 2 functions here. Let's do move widget to the right. And this function is just going to take in the ID of the widget itself. Okay. Similarly, we'll have move widget to the left. Okay. Now, so the strategy I'm using here is pretty simple. And it is that I'm going to change the positioning of the widget in the array. Now, you can use more complex ways, but I thought that this was the simplest way to achieve what I wanted. And implementation wise, we just need to swap the 2 widgets in the array and basically exchange the 2 places. All right. So for example, if it is the 0th index, we want to switch and we want to move to the right, we are going to replace that with the first index. So the first index widget is going to become the 0th index widget, and the 0th index widget will become the first index widget, all right? So very simple. Let's try that out. So first we're gonna get the index in the array. So we're going to do this dot added widgets dot find index, and w dot id is equals to the id that we have here. And so we also have to check the extreme condition here so that we don't move things further than a certain point. So for the moving widget to the right, we need to check if it is the last widget in the array. So if it is, then we just ignore that and return the function. So let's check this here. And if we say that, okay, if index is equals to this dot length, that is the maximum, and -1, which is the last index, then we just return this. Okay, we won't do anything. Okay, and if this is not the case, then we want to carry on with the swapping procedure. So for the swapping procedure, we're going to create a new widgets array here, which has the data of the old widgets. This we do for immutability, as I mentioned before. And then we use the array destructuring syntax to swap the values. So for moving to the right, we basically want to assign the new widgets index and the new widgets index +1 object, and we want to assign it to two objects which we are going to define here. So this one will be new widgets index +1, and here it's going to be new widgets index. Okay, so index +1 is going to go into index, and index is going to go into index +1, so it's swapping. So this is a nice syntax for array destruction syntax for swapping two elements in an array. And then when we have the new widgets, we are just going to update the signal to these new widgets. Okay, so this should work, and we are just going to copy this in, and we're going to do the same thing for move widgets left. Here the only difference will be that we're going to check the extreme case to be 0, because we want to prevent moving it to the left of the 0 index, because there's no space there. And then here we want to change the index, and then index -1, which is the adjacent widget. And then for -1 we are going to for +1 we're going to do -1 here as well. So the -1 or the previous widget is going to go in the index one, and the index widget is going to go in the previous one. So it's going to swap places, right? And then the rest of the stuff remains the same. So now we just need to go back to our widget options, and we are going to link the click event handlers with our widgets here. So chevron right is going to be store.move widget to the right, and we're going to send the data.id here. Similarly, we're going to do the same thing for this here, except we're going to do this chevron left. Okay, let's save this, and now let's test this out. So we go in our settings here, we click on the right, and you can see that when we click on further, it doesn't go any further, and we click on it left side, and it doesn't go any further from the left side as well. So our extreme conditions are working here. Similarly, for the views as well, it works as we want it to. All right, so we have added the resizable features, and we have added the positioning feature here, which was a big part of the customization of this dashboard widgets. Now in the next part, we are going to add the delete functionality. We are also going to add some more configuration options in the object itself, so that we can change the background colors and the colors of our widgets, so that we can create those nice differently looking widgets. Also, of course, we are going to add the animation, the nice looking animations, the smooth buttery animations using animate CSS grid. And then lastly, we're also going to sync to local storage. So we have a lot coming up, and if you are not already subscribed to the channel, I welcome you to subscribe to the channel so that you can get notified of the last part. And as always, please like and share it with your friends and colleagues so that others can benefit from this as well. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.